The following week unfolded like any other, or so it seemed. Ethan's days were predictable, filled with office meetings, emails, and the dull rhythm of routine. But beneath that quiet surface, something had shifted. He couldn't quite name it, but it was there, a faint current running through his ordinary days. Claire had been different. Not distant, not exactly closer either, but present in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. She hummed while cooking again, smiled to herself while driving, and sometimes looked at him as though she was remembering something. It left Ethan both curious and cautious. After so many years together, he knew the rhythm of her moods. And this one felt purposeful, like she was planning something quietly, something meaningful. One Thursday evening, when Ethan came home, the house was unusually quiet. No sound from the TV, no clatter from the kitchen. Just soft music playing from the living room, a piano melody he recognized instantly. It was their song. He froze in the hallway, heart fluttering with an odd mix of nostalgia and confusion. That song hadn't played in years, not since their wedding anniversary 5 years ago, when they had danced in their living room with takeout containers on the table and candles flickering unevenly. "Claire," he called softly. Here her voice answered from the kitchen. When he walked in, he found her standing at the counter, arranging something on a tray, 2 cups of tea, a plate of cookies, and a small notebook tied with a red ribbon. She looked up, smiling. "I thought we could sit outside tonight. The weather's nice." Ethan blinked. It was such a simple suggestion, yet something in her tone made it feel special. "Sure," he said with a grin. "That sounds perfect." They stepped out to the back porch. The evening air was cool and gentle, carrying the faint scent of blooming lilacs, the same kind from their wedding. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky with shades of orange and violet. They sat quietly for a while, sipping tea and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, a dog barking somewhere, the distant hum of cars, the rustling of leaves. It felt peaceful, but also strangely charged, like the air before a long-awaited conversation. Claire finally spoke. "Do you remember the night we first talked about building a life together?" Ethan chuckled softly. "You mean when we stayed up till sunrise on your apartment balcony, pretending to plan our future, but mostly just laughing at how broke we were?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "You promised me we'd never stop finding reasons to laugh." "I did," he admitted. "And I guess I forgot somewhere along the way." She looked down at her tea. "We both did." There was no anger in her voice, just quiet truth. After a moment, she untied the ribbon around the notebook and placed it on his lap. "I started this a few months ago," she said softly. "It's a journal. Every time I thought of something I was grateful for, I wrote it down. Things about us." Ethan opened the notebook carefully. Inside were pages filled with her handwriting, neat and gentle, just like her voice. The way he always makes coffee for 2, even when I don't drink it. The way he tries to fix things around the house, even when he doesn't know how. The quiet look in his eyes when he listens. Ethan's throat tightened. "Claire, I didn't know you were doing this." "I didn't plan to show you," she said. "But lately, I've been thinking a lot about how easy it is to forget the small things that make love work. I almost forgot to. I don't want to anymore." He turned the pages slowly, reading bits of their life captured in ink, small, imperfect, beautiful fragments of time. With every word, he felt something uncoil inside him, something that had been asleep for too long. When he finally looked up, he said, "Why now? Why start this?" Claire took a deep breath. "Because I realized we were losing the habit of noticing each other. I missed us, Ethan. Not the version that traveled the world or chased promotions, but the version that sat in the rain and laughed about nothing. And then, one morning, I decided I wouldn't wait for a special occasion to remind you what you mean to me." Her voice trembled slightly, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft whistle of wind through the trees. Ethan set the notebook down and looked at her. Really looked. The faint lines near her eyes, the way her hair had a few more strands of silver, the warmth in her gaze that never changed. She was the same woman he'd fallen in love with, just stronger, wiser, and somehow even more beautiful. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out and covered her hand with his. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight that words couldn't. Claire smiled that same soft Allah, mysterious smile he'd noticed the week before. "There's more," she said. "You'll see soon." Ethan laughed lightly. "You really do love suspense, don't you?" Maybe, she teased. "But this time, it's worth it." They sat there as twilight deepened into night, the sky filling with stars. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was comfortable, shared, full of unspoken understanding. He realized that love wasn't about avoiding distance. It was about finding ways to bridge it. Again and again, as they went inside, Claire picked up the notebook and placed it on the mantel beside the ceramic lighthouse. The two objects, one from the past, one from the present, seemed to belong together, side by side, like symbols of what they had weathered and what they still hoped for. Ethan glanced at her as she turned off the lights. There was something peaceful about her tonight, like a woman who had finally found the courage to bring light back into the dark corners of their home. And as he followed her down the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was planning, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a turning point, one that fate, or love, or maybe both, had quietly led them to. The days following their quiet evening on the porch seemed lighter somehow. Ethan noticed it in small ways, the way Claire hummed while folding laundry, the way she reached for his hand absent-mindedly while passing him a cup of tea. It wasn't a grand transformation, but something within their home had shifted. Still, beneath that newfound peace lingered a quiet unease, not because of distance, but because of what both of them hadn't yet said. Some truths, Ethan thought, are so fragile that speaking them out loud feels like risking their weight collapsing. On Saturday morning, he found Claire sitting by the window with the same wooden box she had shown him once before. The soft light touched her hair, turning it to strands of gold. She didn't notice him right away. Her fingers moved gently over the letters inside, each one folded neatly. Held with careful reverence, Ethan stood silently for a moment, not wanting to disturb her. There was something achingly beautiful about the sight, the woman he loved revisiting their past, as if trying to trace the thread that had once tied them so tightly together. When she finally noticed him, she smiled softly. "You always wake up earlier than I do," she said. "I guess old habits don't change," he replied. Then he added a little hesitantly, "You're reading our letters again?" "Some of them," she said, looking down at the paper in her lap. "It's strange. When I read these, I can still hear our voices. We were so young then, so sure of everything." Ethan sat beside her. "We still are in some ways." Claire shook her head gently. "No, we're different now. We've seen how love isn't just laughter and dreams. It's also forgiveness, patience, and 1,000 small choices we don't always get right." Her words hung in the air like soft rain. Ethan wanted to tell her he understood, that he too had felt the quiet ache of wanting to go back, not to undo things, but to relive the simplicity of who they used to be. But he didn't. Instead, he placed his hand on hers. Her hand was warm, familiar, steady. "Claire," he said quietly, "I know things haven't always been easy. I know I've let work and stress and everything else take too much space. But there's not a single day I don't think about how lucky I am that you're here." She didn't look at him at first. Instead, her eyes stayed fixed on the box in her lap. "You know," she said, "there were moments I thought you didn't see me anymore." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "I did," he whispered. "I just didn't know how to say it." Claire nodded faintly. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? The things we never say. We get so used to being together that we forget to tell each other what matters most." Her voice trembled, and for a moment Ethan saw the quiet sadness she had been carrying. Not anger, not disappointment, just the sorrow of unspoken things. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but she looked up before he could. "You don't need to apologize," she said, reading his thoughts. "We both stopped talking somewhere along the way. We filled our days with plans and lists and forgot that love needs words, too. Even simple ones like, 'I miss you.'" The honesty in her tone cut through the silence. Ethan swallowed hard. "Do you ever wonder if we still have time to fix that? Claire turned to him, her eyes shimmering but calm. Of course we do. That's what love is, Ethan. It's the promise that there's always time as long as we keep choosing each other. He looked at her, then really looked. There were faint lines near her eyes now, the gentle marks of time that spoke of laughter, worry, and life shared. But to him, she was still the same woman who'd danced in the rain. The one who'd believed in moments more than milestones. I wish I told you more often, he said softly. How much I still love the way you laugh. How safe I feel when you're near. How I notice the little things. Like how you. Next evening, the house was filled with a quiet anticipation. Ethan sat in the living room, pretending to scroll through his phone, though his thoughts kept drifting back to Claire. She had been unusually calm all day, moving around the house with a careful purpose, pausing at corners, sometimes holding something close to her chest before tucking it away. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what she was planning. His curiosity wasn't nervousness, it was a gentle, almost childlike excitement. The kind that comes when someone you love is about to reveal a piece of themselves you haven't seen before. Claire emerged from the study, carrying a small wooden box, similar in size to the one she had shown him earlier, but this one was polished and heavier. She set it down in front of him, her hands lingering on the edges for a moment. Ethan, she began softly, I've been holding on to this for a while. Not because I wanted to surprise you with something expensive or grand, but because I wanted you to see what I've felt all these years, what I haven't always been able to put into words. Ethan's throat tightened. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. Claire. She shook her head gently. Just listen, please. He nodded. Claire opened the box, revealing a collection of letters, small photographs, and keepsakes carefully arranged inside. Each piece told a story of their first dates, their adventures, the quiet moments they shared that had never been captured in photos or social media posts. She handed him the first letter, her fingers brushing his hand. I wrote these over time, she said. Some I never gave to you because I didn't know how. Some I couldn't find the right moment for. But I realized that if I didn't show you now, I might regret it forever. Ethan took the letter and opened it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable, familiar, delicate, and full of thought. Ethan, I know sometimes it feels like we're drifting, even when we're in the same room. But I want you to know that every day I see you. I notice the way you pause before answering a question. The way you care for the small details. The way you make our home feel safe and warm. I love you not just for who you are, but for every little moment we share, even the ones that go unnoticed. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Words he had wanted to hear but had never dared to ask for now sat before him, alive and real. Claire, he whispered, his voice catching. She reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers. I didn't know how else to tell you. I've loved you quietly, Ethan. Even in the moments when I seemed distant or distracted, my heart was always with you. And I needed you to know that, truly know it. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to that small living room, the two of them connected by nothing but the fragile, unspoken truths that had finally found a voice. Ethan felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming love. He realized that the distance they had felt wasn't absence. It was just the quiet struggle of two people who loved deeply but hadn't learned how to express it consistently. I've been so afraid, he admitted, his voice trembling, that I had failed you, that I didn't show you how much you mean to me every day. But hearing this, seeing this, I understand now. I see everything you've carried in your heart, and I want you to know I've felt the same way, even when I didn't say it. Claire's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile remained steady, the smile that had always carried courage beneath its gentleness. You don't have to prove it to me with words anymore, she said. I just want us to remember, together, why we started this journey, why we chose each other. Ethan took a deep breath. He reached into the box and pulled out a small photograph, one of their first anniversary, when they had celebrated quietly in their apartment with candles and a simple cake. I remember this day, he said, smiling. I remember feeling like nothing else mattered as long as you were with me." "And I remember," Claire whispered, "how we promised to always choose each other, no matter what life brought us." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their shared memories and confessions settle around them. It was a turning point, a moment where unspoken truths were finally spoken, and the quiet longing that had hovered between them for years was acknowledged and embraced. Ethan reached out and held Claire's hands. "I've never stopped loving you," he said. "Not for a day. And now, I promise, I'll make sure you feel that love in the small ways and the big ways every day we have together." Claire leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against his. "I needed to hear that," she said softly. "I needed to know that we're still us." And in that quiet, simple act, two hearts leaning into each other. Finally, unburdened, the turning point became real. No grand gestures were needed. No dramatic announcements. Just honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to share what had long remained unspoken. In that moment, Ethan and Claire both understood something profound. Love isn't only in the fireworks or the celebrations. Sometimes it's in the courage to speak the truths that linger quietly in the heart. And as they held each other's hands, surrounded by letters and memories, they both felt it. The promise that their story wasn't just surviving anymore. It was alive, deeply rooted, and ready for the next chapter. The morning sun spilled softly through the curtains, painting the room with a gentle warmth. Ethan woke first, as usual, and for a moment, he simply lay there, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. Today felt different. There was a lightness in the air, a subtle shift that made ordinary sounds, like the hum of the fridge or the ticking of the clock, feel like part of a symphony. Claire was still asleep beside him, the faint rise and fall of her breathing steady and calm. He reached out to brush a loose strand of hair from her face and paused, savoring the simple intimacy of the moment. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just two people who had rediscovered the quiet strength of being together. He thought back to the past weeks, to the letters, the journals, the soft confessions, and the unspoken truths finally shared. Every step had been small, subtle, yet profound. The love that had been quietly waiting for acknowledgement had now been spoken aloud. Recognized and embraced, Ethan finally rose, careful not to wake her, and walked to the kitchen. He made 2 cups of coffee, carrying one back to the bedroom. Claire stirred as he entered, rubbing her eyes but smiling when she saw him. "Morning," he said softly, handing her the cup. "Morning," she replied, her voice still thick with sleep but warm with affection. They sat together on the edge of the bed, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. There were no urgent conversations, no lists of tasks for the day, just the quiet presence of each other. For Ethan, it felt like the first real morning they had shared in years. Not rushed, not distracted, just present. After a moment, Claire spoke. "Do you remember the first time we danced in the living room?" Ethan chuckled. "How could I forget? You insisted on candles and music, even though we had takeout boxes on the table." She laughed softly. "We were silly, weren't we?" "Yes," he said, smiling but happy. "And that happiness, I think it's still here, just waiting for us to notice it again." Claire reached for his hand. "It is. I can feel it now." That small gesture, holding hands, fingers entwined, carried more weight than anything they could have said. It was reassurance, acknowledgement, and a promise all at once. Later that morning, they decided to take a walk by the lake, the same one where so many of their first memories were made. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of early spring blooms. The water shimmered under the sunlight, just as it had on the day Ethan had first photographed Claire laughing on the dock as they walked. They shared stories, not just the big ones, but small memories that had made their life together special. The day felt expansive, almost magical, as if the world itself had slowed to honor their moment. At one point, Claire stopped and turned to him. "Ethan, I know life will get busy again. There will be deadlines, errands, and distractions. But I want us to remember this us, here, like this even when the world tries to pull us apart." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We will. We'll choose each other every day, like we promised." They continued along the path, laughing softly at a shared joke, pausing to watch a family of ducks glide across the lake and breathing in the crisp, clean air. In the simplicity of the day, there was profound contentment. They didn't need grand gestures or perfect moments, just each other by late afternoon. They returned home feeling lighter than they had in years. Ethan noticed the small items around the house, the lighthouse on the mantel, the journal on the side table, and realized that these objects, these memories, were now more than tokens. They were symbols of resilience, understanding, and enduring love. That evening, as the sun set, they sat together on the porch. Ethan reached over, taking Claire's hand again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" She asked, her head tilted toward him. "For never giving up on us. For showing me that love isn't about perfection, but about choosing each other every single day." Claire smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "And thank you for finally noticing that I was always here waiting. That I still am." They sat there for a long time, watching the sky shift from amber to deep indigo, the first stars beginning to appear. There were no grand proclamations, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet, steady presence of two people who had remembered how to love fully. Ethan leaned back, exhaling a long breath. The clock ticked softly in the quiet house, marking another lonely Saturday morning for Ethan Hayes. The kind of morning that felt too still. When even the sunlight hesitated to enter the room, the coffee on the table had gone cold, untouched for nearly an hour. He had poured 2 cups out of habit. Even though he knew only one would be needed, Ethan sat by the window, watching the neighborhood wake up. Across the street, a young couple laughed as they packed their car for a weekend trip. The woman leaned into her husband's shoulder, and he kissed her forehead before starting the engine. It was such a simple gesture, yet it struck something deep in Ethan's heart, that quiet ache he'd learned to live with. He wasn't alone, not really. He had a home, a job he didn't hate, and a wife, Claire, who still smiled at him every morning. But lately, their smiles felt like polite hellos rather than warm embraces. They had been married for 12 years. And in between the bills, the deadlines, and the quiet arguments that never turned into real fights, something had faded. Not love, perhaps, but the easy closeness that once made love effortless. Ethan still remembered the way. Claire used to rush into his arms after work, breathless from the day but full of stories. Now their evenings were quieter. She would scroll through her phone. He would stare at the TV, pretending to care about sports he barely followed. There was no anger, just silence. Sometimes, silence can be louder than words. He wondered when it started, that invisible wall between them. Maybe after his long business trips. Maybe after she lost her father and he didn't know how to comfort her properly. Or maybe it was just life quietly shifting the ground beneath their feet, until one day they realized they were standing apart. Still, Ethan believed love wasn't something that disappeared. It just needed to be remembered. He looked at the photo on the mantel, their wedding day in late spring. Claire's eyes sparkled with laughter and his arm was wrapped tightly around her. He could still recall the scent of the lilacs that day, and how he promised her they'd never forget the feeling of being that happy. But feelings, he had learned, were like sand, easy to hold when you're still, but quick to slip away when life starts moving too fast. As he set his cup down, he heard footsteps from the hallway. Claire appeared wearing one of his old sweaters, her hair tied back in a loose bun, her eyes gentle but distant. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, forcing a smile. "Coffee's still warm if you want some." She nodded, taking the cup he'd poured for her without realizing it. For a moment, their eyes met. And in that brief second, Ethan thought he saw something in her gaze, a glimmer of tenderness. Or maybe sadness. "You're up early," she said. "Sitting across from him, couldn't sleep," Ethan replied. "Had a lot on my mind." "Work." He shook his head. "No, just life, I guess." Claire didn't respond, but her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. There was so much they didn't say to each other anymore. Words that once came easily now felt like glass. Fragile and sharp. After a pause, Claire said, "You been quiet lately?" Ethan almost laughed at the irony. So have you. She smiled faintly, not defensive, not cold, just thoughtful. Maybe we both forgot how to talk. That sentence stayed with him. It wasn't an accusation, it was a confession. Before he could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it quickly and turned it face down. Normally, Ethan wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something about her movement, quick, almost nervous, caught his attention. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, pretending not to notice. But deep down, a small flicker of curiosity sparked. Claire stood up and said, "I have a few errands to run today. Don't wait for me for lunch, okay?" "Sure," he said. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," she replied, a little too quickly. Then she leaned over and kissed his cheek. A soft, absent-minded gesture before grabbing her coat. "See you later." The door clicked shut and Ethan was alone again. He sat there for a while, staring at the door she had just walked through. Something about the way she left, the calmness, the careful tone, made him uneasy. Not suspicious in a jealous way, but in a wondering way. Was she planning something? Was she hiding something? He shook his head, brushing off the thought. Claire wasn't the secretive type. She was kind, steady, the one who always remembered birthdays and anniversaries when he forgot. But lately, she'd been distant, thoughtful, almost restless. As the day stretched on, Ethan tried to distract himself with chores, music, even old movies. But his mind kept circling back to her, to the quiet look she'd given him, to the phone she turned over, to the way she seemed to be carrying something unspoken that evening. When she returned home, there was a strange calmness in her eyes. She seemed lighter somehow, but focused, like a person who knew something others didn't. When Ethan asked how her day was, she smiled softly and said, "You'll find out soon." It was such a small phrase, but it filled the room with a quiet tension, not the heavy kind, but the mysterious kind that makes your heart lean forward. Waiting. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Not because he was worried, but because for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, even excitement. Something was changing. He didn't know what it was yet. But it felt like the beginning of a story he thought had ended long ago. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of routine and silence, Ethan felt hope, small, fragile, but alive. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening under a pale sun. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his fingers tracing circles on the rim of his coffee cup. Claire had already left for work, and the house was quiet again, too quiet, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his gallery without much thought, between random photos and forgotten screenshots. He stumbled upon one he hadn't seen in years, a picture of him and Claire at the old lakeside park. It was from their first summer together. She was sitting on the dock with her feet dipped in the water, laughing so hard her eyes were nearly closed. He remembered taking that picture and thinking, "This is what happiness looks like." It felt like a lifetime ago. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the memory play in his mind like an old film reel, faded at the edges but warm at the center. They had been so young then. He was still figuring out his career, still living paycheck to paycheck, but Claire never cared about those things. She always said she believed in moments, not milestones. He remembered one of those moments vividly, a chilly autumn evening when they got caught in the rain, walking home from a small diner. They had no umbrella, no car, just laughter echoing down empty streets as they ran hand in hand through puddles. When they finally reached her apartment, both drenched and breathless, she looked at him and said, "If we can still laugh in the rain, we can handle anything." And they did for a while. The early years of their marriage were filled with that kind of simplicity. Movie nights with popcorn. Late night drives to nowhere. Notes she'd leave in his lunch bag. "You're my favorite part of every day." Little things that felt like promises. But life, as it often does, began to move faster. Ethan took on longer hours at work, trying to build a future for them. Claire's career picked up too, and she started traveling more often. They told themselves it was temporary, that once things settled, they'd take that trip to the coast or start the family they used to talk about. But someday kept getting postponed, and before long, it became just another word for never. Ethan exhaled slowly, setting his phone down. He didn't blame either of them. It wasn't anyone's fault. Love didn't vanish. It just got buried under layers of exhaustion, deadlines, and quiet disappointments. He stood up and walked into the living room. On the bookshelf was a small ceramic lighthouse, a souvenir from that same lakeside trip. Claire had bought it from a vendor who sold handmade crafts. He could still hear her voice teasing him. It's supposed to remind us to find our way back when we get lost. He smiled at the thought. Somewhere along the line, maybe they had both gotten a little lost that evening. When Claire came home, she found Ethan sitting on the couch holding the lighthouse in his hands. She tilted her head. "You still have that old thing?" "Of course," he said, setting it gently back on the shelf. "You told me it was supposed to guide us home." Her lips curved into a soft, almost nostalgic smile. "I did, didn't I?" There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy with shared memories. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Miss what?" "Us, the way we used to be." Claire hesitated. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Every day," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say after that. No need to fill the silence with explanations or apologies. That single sentence said everything. They had both been missing the same thing all along. Not the version of themselves that laughed under the rain, but the feeling of being seen, understood, and chosen every single day after dinner. Claire disappeared into the study for a while. Ethan could hear the faint sound of paper rustling and drawers opening. When she came back, she looked almost shy, as if she were hiding something behind that calm smile again. He raised an eyebrow playfully. "Planning another mystery?" She laughed, a small, genuine laugh that warmed the room. "Maybe. You'll just have to wait and see." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You always did.